The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what waited beyond. When humans finally built ships strong enough to cross the darkness between worlds, they found an answer that changed everything. They were not alone. Ambassador Park remembered the day she first stepped onto Station Prime. The massive space station floated at the edge of known space, built by species far older than humanity. Lights of every color glowed from windows that stretched for kilometers. Ships from 100 different worlds docked at its ports, and waiting to greet the first human delegation was the collective. They were beautiful in a strange way. Their skin glowed with soft light that changed color with their emotions. They stood taller than humans, with long limbs and gentle faces. When the Elder Prime approached, his skin pulsed with warm, golden light. Extended her hand in the human way of greeting. The Elder Prime studied the gesture for a moment, then reached out and took her hand in his. His touch was warm, almost electric. "We have watched your kind for many cycles," the Elder Prime said. His voice was soft, like wind through leaves. "You are not like the others who crawled from young worlds. You carry something familiar in your hearts, a fire, a hunger to grow and learn and protect." Felt tears forming in her eyes. After so many years of wondering if humanity was alone, here was a hand reaching back. "We would be honored to know your people," she said. The Elder Prime's skin turned a brilliant shade of blue, which would later learn meant deep happiness. "Then let it be known across all stars," he announced to the gathered assembly. "Humanity shall be called siblings of the stars. They are our family now." For 30 years, the bond between humans and grew stronger. They shared technology that helped humanity spread to new worlds. They traded goods and knowledge freely. Human colonies welcomed settlers, and worlds opened their doors to humans. Captain Lee had grown up during this golden age. He was born on Earth but had spent most of his adult life among the stars. Now he commanded the HSS Indomitable, one of humanity's finest warships, but was not a man who loved war. He kept a photo of his daughter on his desk, and he smiled every time he looked at it. Had been born on Prime. Her first words were a mix of Korean and language. She grew up playing with children, learning their songs, sharing their food. To her, the differences between species meant nothing. They were all just friends. Visited whenever his duties allowed. He would sit within the purple gardens of their home and tell her stories about Earth, about oceans so vast you could sail for days without seeing land, about mountains that touched the clouds, about a moon that glowed silver in the night sky. "Will you take me there someday, Father?" always asked. "Someday," always promised, "when you are older." Those were happy years, but not everyone in the galaxy shared in this happiness. The Dominion had ruled their corner of space for 10,000 years. They were ancient and cold, with hard shells instead of skin and eyes that saw only strength and weakness. Long ago, they had served them as slaves. They had released them only when they became more trouble than they were worth. Now they watched as humanity spread across the stars with alarming speed. Humans bred quickly. They adapted to new worlds faster than any species they had ever seen. And worst of all, they were forming bonds with that produced something unexpected. Children. Not half human, half children. The species were too different for that. But children who grew up in mixed communities developed strange abilities. Human intuition combined with psionic sensitivity created minds that could sense things others could not. They could feel emotions across great distances. Some could even glimpse possible futures. They studied these children from afar. They ran calculations. They made plans, and in the cold halls of there they reached a decision. These hybrid communities were a threat. The children were a resource. Both problems had the same solution. The War Council met in secret. Their leader, known only as the Architect, stood before screens showing human and colonies. His shell was black as space, and his voice carried no emotion. The humans call themselves siblings to the architect said. They believe this makes them safe. They believe the galaxy is kind. He touched a control, and the screens zoomed in on schools, playgrounds, homes where children laughed and played. They are wrong. No warning was given. No demands were made. They did not believe in such things. They believed in action, swift and absolute. On New Sol Colony, the morning began like any other. Parents sent their children to school. Workers traveled to their jobs. The twin suns rose over the green hills, and the air smelled of flowers from Earth that had learned to bloom on alien soil. Doctor arrived at her classroom early, as she always did. She taught biology to children between the ages of 10 and 14. Today's lesson was about the differences and similarities between human and bodies. Her students loved these lessons, comparing their own hands to their classmates' hands, finding all the ways they were alike. Looked out the window at the peaceful sky. In a few minutes her students would arrive. In a few minutes she would begin her lesson. She did not know that high above the colony, warships were emerging from faster-than-light travel. She did not know that we're already descending through the atmosphere, hidden by technology humanity had never seen. She did not know that everything was about to change. The first explosion shattered the morning silence, and its world fell apart. The sky above New Sol Colony split open like a wound. Black ships, shaped like insects with sharp edges, dropped through the clouds. They made no sound as they fell. That silence was somehow worse than any roar of engines could have been. Doctor grabbed the edge of her desk as the first explosion hit somewhere in the city. The windows of her classroom rattled. Alarms began to scream across the colony, a sound that every citizen knew meant danger. Her students would be arriving any moment, ran to the door and looked down the hallway. Other teachers were emerging from their rooms, faces full of confusion and fear. "Get to the shelters," the school principal shouted through the communication system. "All students and staff, proceed to emergency shelters immediately." But there was no time. The ceiling above exploded inward, and she threw herself to the ground as debris rained down. Through the dust and smoke, she saw shapes descending on cables. Soldiers, their armor black and gleaming, their weapons raised. They moved through the school with terrible efficiency, watched in horror as they used handheld devices to scan each child they found. Some children were pushed aside. Others were grabbed and carried toward the outside. "No!" screamed. She grabbed a piece of broken furniture and swung it at the nearest soldier. The blow bounced off this armor without effect. A metal hand caught her throat and lifted her from the ground. The soldier studied her with eyes like black stones. Then, without a word, it threw her against the wall. Its vision went dark. Across the colony, the same nightmare repeated in every school, every playground, every home where children lived. They did not kill unless someone stood in their way. They were not there for destruction. They were there to collect. Sergeant was off duty when the attack began. He had been sleeping late, enjoying a rare day of rest. His wife had left early to take their twin sons and to school. The boys were 12 years old, full of energy and mischief, had kissed them goodbye just 2 hours ago. The explosion woke him. Training took over before thought could catch up. He was dressed and armed within 30 seconds, running toward the sound of chaos. What he found stopped his heart. The school was half destroyed. Smoke rose from broken walls. Parents were screaming, digging through rubble, calling names that no one answered. Were already lifting off, carrying their stolen cargo toward the warships waiting in orbit. Searched the destruction with desperate eyes. He found lying in a pile of broken concrete, unconscious but breathing. He pulled her free and held her face in his hands. "Wake up." Her eyes opened slowly. Blood ran down her forehead from a cut hidden in her hair. She looked at, and then understanding crashed into her like a wave. "The boys," she whispered, her voice broke on the words. "They took the boys, they scanned them and they took them. I tried to stop them, I tried." She collapsed against him, sobbing, held her and stared at the sky where they were disappearing. His sons were on one of those ships. His children were being taken, and he could do nothing but watch. High above the planet, Captain Lee received the emergency transmission on the bridge of the Indomitable. His first officer's face was pale as she read the reports coming in from the surface. Multiple warships in orbit around New Sol Colony, activity across all major population centers. They're targeting children, Captain, schools, homes, anywhere children gather. Felt ice spread through his chest. Was on Prime, far from New Sol, but if they were attacking human colonies for children. "Get me a connection to Prime," he ordered, "now." The minutes it took to establish contact were the longest of his life. When the image finally appeared on screen, it was not his wife's face he saw. It was an emergency coordinator, skin flickering with the gray color of distress. "Captain Lee, I am sorry. Prime was also attacked. They came for the children here as well. Your daughter," the coordinator paused, struggling to continue. "Your daughter was taken, along with hundreds of others." The bridge went silent. Every officer turned to look at their captain, stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to breathe. His little girl, gone. Another transmission arrived, this one from the Elder Prime himself. The ancient being looked older than had ever seen him. His skin held no color at all, just a terrible empty gray. "Siblings of the stars," the Elder Prime said, his voice heavy with grief. "They have taken 4,847 children from across our worlds. Human children, children who grew up together, learned together, loved together. We do not yet know why they have done this." On the surface of New Sol, Sergeant held his unconscious wife and listened to the Elder Prime's message through a broken public speaker. "We must proceed carefully," the Elder Prime continued. "We must discover their purpose. We must negotiate, find a peaceful solution." Stopped listening. Peaceful solution. Negotiate. His sons were in the hands of monsters who saw children as objects to be collected, and the galaxy wanted to talk. He looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, and were scared and alone. Somewhere up there, thousands of children waited for someone to save them. On the Indomitable, Captain Lee finally moved. He turned to his communications officer with eyes that had gone cold and hard. "Open a channel to Earth Command," he said. His voice was steady, but those who knew him could hear the storm building beneath. "Tell them what has happened. Tell them our children have been taken. And tell them." He paused, looking at the photo on his desk. Her smile, her eyes, her small hand waving goodbye. "Tell them humanity is coming to get them back." The Galactic Assembly gathered in emergency session. Representatives from 47 species filled the Great Hall, their voices rising in argument and fear. The attack on human and colonies had shocked everyone, but what shocked them more was humanity's response. Within 72 hours, the United Earth Fleet had assembled the largest military force in human history. 47 warships pulled from every corner of human space, 12 carrier groups loaded with fighters and bombers, 200,000 Marines, all of them volunteers. There had been no need to order anyone. When the call went out, soldiers came from every colony, every station, every ship. They came because they had seen the footage. They came because they knew the names of stolen children. They came because this was what humans did. Admiral stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, the flagship of the rescue fleet. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face that showed no emotion. She had commanded warships for 30 years. She had seen battles that would give most people nightmares. But this mission was different. This mission was personal. Her granddaughter was among the taken, 7 years old, loved to draw pictures of spaceships, called her grandmother Nana, and always asked for stories about the stars. Admiral looked at the fleet assembled around her flagship. Every ship carried parents, siblings, grandparents of stolen children. Every soldier had memorized at least one name. "Open a channel to all ships," she ordered. The communication officer. Across the fleet, screens lit up with Admiral's face. "They believe we are young," she began. "They have watched us for decades, studied our technology, analyzed our tactics. They know our weapons, our ships, our treaties. They think they understand us." She paused, letting her words sink in. "They are wrong." On the Indomitable, Captain Lee stood with his crew and listened. His hands were clenched at his sides. His photo was tucked in his pocket, close to his heart. "They have studied our machines," Admiral continued. "But they have not studied our history. They do not know what we were before we reached the stars. They do not know the wars we fought, the predators we hunted, the impossible things we survived." Her voice grew harder, colder. "They took our children. They expected us to negotiate, to beg, to accept whatever scraps they offered." A small, terrifying smile crossed her face. "They do not know that we are the species that burned forests to kill lions, that drained oceans to catch whales, that chased prey across continents until it dropped dead from exhaustion." She leaned forward, and every person in the fleet felt her eyes on them. "Today they become our prey. We do not stop until every child is home. We do not rest until every enemy is broken. Fleet, prepare to jump. We hunt." The fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel. They had expected pursuit. They had prepared defensive positions, placed warships to guard their territory, set traps in the darkness between stars. They had done all the calculations. By their estimates, humanity would take weeks to organize a proper response. They were wrong by a factor of 10. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light directly inside defensive lines. It was a maneuver that no sane military strategist would attempt. The risks were enormous. Ships could emerge inside asteroids, or too close to gravity wells, or directly in the path of enemy fire. But humans were not thinking about risk. They were thinking about their children. The defensive fleet was destroyed in 4 hours. Not defeated, destroyed. Human ships fought without formations, without predictable patterns. They swarmed like angry insects, attacking from every direction at once. When one ship was damaged, another took its place. When pilots died, others volunteered to fly into the same danger. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Lee commanded his ship through the chaos with cold precision. A cruiser exploded before him, and he felt nothing but the need to keep moving forward. "Sir, we're receiving distress calls from escape pods," his communications officer reported. "Note their positions for the assembly rescue ships," replied. "Then continue pursuit of remaining enemy forces." His crew looked at him with surprise. The old Captain Lee would have stopped to help survivors, but the old Captain Lee had not yet lost his daughter. The real battle came on the ground. Sergeant led his unit onto the orbital defense platform through a breach in the outer hull. Vacuum alarms screamed. Emergency lights flashed red. Somewhere ahead, sensors showed life signs that might be human, might be, and "Contact ahead," his point man shouted. Soldiers appeared at the end of the corridor, weapons firing. Felt a plasma bolt graze his shoulder, burning through armor and flesh. He did not slow down. He raised his rifle and kept firing, kept moving, kept killing. Half his squad fell in the first 5 minutes. He did not stop for them. Later there would be time for grief. Later there would be time to honor the dead. Now there was only the mission. They pushed deeper into the station. More fell before them. More humans died beside them. The corridors filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Then the scanner operator shouted words that made everything worthwhile. Human and life signs, juvenile signatures, Section 7G just ahead. Ran, his lungs burned, his wounds screamed. He did not care. He kicked open the final door and found a room full of stasis pods, each one glowing with soft blue light. Through the glass, he could see sleeping faces. Children, safe and whole, waiting to be rescued. He moved down the rows, searching each pod until he found them. Pod 2201 and Pod 2202, and his twin sons, sleeping peacefully in the cold blue light. Fell to his knees and pressed his hands against the glass. Tears ran down his face, mixing with blood and sweat. "I found you," he whispered. "I found you." But across the station, Doctor was discovering something that would change everything. She had come aboard as a field medic, and now she stood in a laboratory, staring at data screens full of horrific plans. They had not taken children for ransom. They had not taken them for simple cruelty. They had taken them because of what they could become. Living weapons, organic computers, minds enslaved to warships. Read the files with growing horror. The children's unique mental abilities made them perfect for neural interface technology. The plan to wire them directly into their ships, using human and children as processing units for navigation and targeting systems. Conscious, aware, unable to escape. She transmitted the data to the fleet and heard Admiral's response through her earpiece. A single word, spoken with absolute finality. Unacceptable. The hunt was not over, but now humanity knew exactly what they were fighting for. The flagship was a monster of black metal, larger than any ship humanity had ever built. It hung in the darkness of space like a terrible shadow, surrounded by the last of the defensive fleet. And somewhere deep inside, 300 children were being held hostage. Captain Lee stared at the flagship on his. His daughter was in there. He knew it with a certainty that went beyond any scanner reading. A father's heart knew where his child was. "The architect is broadcasting," his communications officer reported. The screen flickered, and the face of the High Commander appeared. The architect was ancient even by standards. His shell had turned the color of dried blood, and his eyes held the cold intelligence of a creature that had lived for thousands of years. "Humans," the architect said. His voice was flat, empty of any feeling. "You have proven more troublesome than expected. I admit I underestimated your response, but this changes nothing." "Release the children," said. "This is your only warning." The architect made a sound that might have been laughter. "You are not in a position to give warnings. I have 300 of your young ones here in the core of my ship. If any human vessel approaches, they will die. If any human soldier attempts to board, they will die." Admiral's voice came through the command channel. "State your terms." "Simple, withdraw your fleet. Return to your space. Accept that you have lost some children but saved others. This is logical. This is efficient. Agree, and I will release half of my remaining hostages as a sign of good faith." Felt rage building in his chest. Half. The monster was offering to return half, as if children were coins to be counted and divided. "And if we refuse?" Admiral asked. "Then they all die. And I begin this process again with new colonies, new targets. You cannot protect all your worlds, Admiral. You cannot guard every child. Eventually, you will understand that cooperation is your only option." The transmission ended. Sat in silence, his mind racing. The architect was right about one thing. A direct assault on the flagship would be suicide. The ship's defenses were too strong. Any attack would give the architect time to kill the hostages. But humanity had not come this far by accepting impossible situations. On the orbital platform they had captured, Sargent was overseeing the evacuation of rescued children when he heard the architect's broadcast. His blood went cold. 300 children still trapped, and his sons, safely recovered from their pods, might have been among them if he had been even an hour slower. He found Captain Lee's frequency and opened a private channel. "Captain, I have an idea." "I'm listening, Sergeant." "The architect expects us to come from outside, through the ship's defenses. He's not expecting someone to already be inside." "Explain." pulled up schematics of the flagship. When we captured this platform, we found maintenance shuttles, small ships designed to move between stations for repairs. They have automated clearance codes. The flagship systems would let them dock without question. Understood immediately. You want to infiltrate the flagship using their own ships. One person. Just one. Small team would be detected, but one person might reach the core before anyone realizes what's happening. That's a suicide mission, Sergeant. Even if you reach the architect, you'll be surrounded by his personal guard. You'd never make it out. There was a long pause, then said, "Sir, my sons are safe because hundreds of soldiers died getting me to them. Parents who will never see their children again because they were buying time for me. I owe a debt I can never repay." His voice hardened. "But I can save 300 more. I can finish this." Captain Lee closed his eyes. He thought of sleeping in her pod somewhere on that flagship. He thought of all the parents waiting for news, hopping for miracles. "Sergeant, you have authorization, and thank you." 1 hour later, a small maintenance shuttle departed the captured platform and drifted toward the flagship. Inside, checked his weapons one final time. 7 plasma wounds covered his body, sealed with medical foam and willpower. His armor was cracked in a dozen places. He had not slept in 3 days. None of that mattered. The shuttle docked without incident, moved through the maintenance corridors, avoiding patrols, following the path to the ship's core. Twice, he had to kill guards silently. 3 times he barely avoided detection. When he reached the core chamber, he found exactly what he expected. The architect stood before a massive, watching the human fleet. Around him, 30 of his personal guard formed a protective ring. And behind them, visible through transparent walls, 300 children floated in stasis pods. Checked his ammunition, 34 rounds left, 30 guards plus the architect, not great odds. He stepped out of the shadows. "Humans always surprise me," the architect said without turning. "I sensed your approach 3 corridors ago. Did you think you were being subtle?" "No," admitted, "I just didn't care." The architect finally turned to face him. Those cold, ancient eyes studied the battered human with something like curiosity. "You are injured, exhausted, alone, and yet you came anyway. Why?" Looked past him at the children floating in their pods. Some were as young as 5, some as old as 15. All of them were someone's entire world. "Because that's what humans do," he said. "We come for our children, no matter what." The architect's guards raised their weapons, raised his, and for one frozen moment no one moved. Then did something they had never seen before. He smiled. "I'm not alone," he said. Behind the architect, the external viewport exploded inward. The Indomitable had fired a precision strike at the exact coordinates had transmitted, breaching the hull directly into the core chamber. Emergency barriers slammed down to prevent total decompression, but the chaos was enough. Moved. He was not a young man, he was not fresh or rested or at full strength, but he was a father, he was a soldier, and he was very, very angry. The fight lasted 47 seconds. Later, analysts would watch the security footage and try to understand how one human had killed 30 guards in less than a minute. They would study his movements, his tactics, his impossible survival of wounds that should have dropped him a dozen times. They would never understand, because what drove in those 47 seconds was not skill or training or luck. It was love. When the last guard fell, stood face to face with the architect, the ancient looked at him with something that might have been respect. "Remarkable," the architect said. "Perhaps we chose poorly when we decided humans were weak." "Yes," agreed, "you did." He fired. The architect fell, and in the silence that followed, 300 children began to wake from their long sleep. Collapsed against a wall, finally letting his wounds take their toll. Through blurring vision, he watched the children emerge from their pods, confused and scared but alive. One girl, maybe 7 years old, walked over to him. She looked at his ruined armor, his bloodied face, his exhausted eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked. Laughed even though it hurt. "I am now, little one, I am now." The rescue ships arrived 20 minutes later. Captain Lee was the first through the door. He ran past the fallen guards, past the architect's body, past the rows of empty pods until he found her. Was sitting with a group of other children, wrapped in an emergency blanket. When she saw her father, her face lit up with a smile that broke his heart and healed it at the same time. "Father," she cried and ran into his arms. Held his daughter and wept. Around him, the same scene repeated across the chamber. Parents finding children, families reunited, the long nightmare finally ending. All 4,847 children were recovered, every single one. But humanity was not finished yet. The celebration lasted for weeks. On every human colony, on every world, people gathered to welcome home the children who had been stolen. Families that had feared the worst held each other and cried tears of joy. News broadcasts showed endless footage of reunions, each one more emotional than the last. But behind the celebrations, humanity was working. The Galactic Assembly demanded that the Dominion face appropriate diplomatic consequences for their crimes. There were hearings, debates, proposals for sanctions and trade restrictions. Species that had stayed silent during the attack now spoke loudly about justice and peace. Ambassador Park listened to it all with a calm expression. She sat in her seat at the assembly, hands folded, waiting. The other representatives did not understand her silence. Humans were usually so eager to speak, to argue, to make their voices heard. They did not realize she was waiting for the signal. When it came, she stood. The great hall fell silent. There was something in her eyes that made even the oldest species uncomfortable. "You speak of consequences," said. Her voice echoed through the chamber. "You debate sanctions and restrictions. You argue about what is fair, what is proper, what is acceptable according to your laws and traditions." She held up a small data chip. "This is our response." The screens around the assembly lit up with footage. Ships burning, stations exploding, the entire military infrastructure of the Dominion reduced to debris and ash. 17 shipyards, 42 defense platforms, 600 warships, all destroyed in 7 days. The assembly sat in stunned silence. "We did not ask your permission," continued. "We did not seek your approval. We did not wait for your debates to conclude or your votes to be counted. While you discussed appropriate consequences, we delivered real ones." She let the footage play, ship after ship exploding, station after station crumbling. The Dominion, once one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy, brought to its knees. "You called us siblings," said. "We were honored by this name. We believed it meant something. We treated you as family, shared our knowledge, welcomed you to our worlds." Her voice grew colder. "And then they took our children. They scanned them like products, loaded them onto ships like cargo, planned to wire their minds into machines while they were still awake, still aware, still screaming inside." Several representatives shifted uncomfortably. They had read the reports. They knew what they had intended. "We gave you 30 years of peace," said. 30 years of diplomacy. 30 years of proof that we could be partners, allies, friends. And in one day, they showed us what you truly thought of us, that our children were resources to be harvested." She looked around the chamber, meeting eyes from 100 different species. "Let me tell you about humanity. On our, we were not apex predators. We were small and weak, without claws or fangs or venom. Everything hunted us. Everything wanted to kill us and eat our children." A pause. "We killed them all." The silence in the chamber was absolute. "We hunted our predators to extinction. We tamed our world. We burned, flooded, and froze anything that threatened us. We reached the stars not because we were peaceful but because we had conquered everything else." She held up the data chip again. You called us siblings. We thought it was a term of respect, but some of you saw it as something else. You saw young creatures new to the stars, eager for friends. You saw weakness. She crushed the data chip in her fist. Now you have seen what we truly are. We are the species that hunted mammoths with sharpened sticks, that crossed oceans in wooden boats, that split atoms and walked on moons. We do not accept limits. We do not accept impossible. And we absolutely do not accept anyone threatening our children. She turned to face the delegation directly. They were the last survivors of their government, brought to the assembly as prisoners rather than representatives. You wanted to make our children into weapons. Instead, you reminded us what we already were. Admiral's face appeared on the assembly screens. Behind her, the human fleet hung in perfect formation, every weapon powered, every ship ready. Humanity demands nothing, Admiral said. We do not seek territory. We do not want revenge. The military is already destroyed. Their ability to threaten anyone is gone. Her eyes swept across the assembly. But let this be a warning to everyone watching. We came to the stars hopping for peace. We found allies in the. We believed we could be part of something good. She leaned forward. That hope remains, but now you know our price. Threaten human children or the children of our friends and we will not negotiate. We will not debate. We will not wait for your assemblies and councils to decide what is appropriate. Her voice dropped to ice. We will end you. The transmission ended. Ambassador Park returned to her seat. She did not smile. She did not look satisfied. This was not a victory to celebrate. It was a line drawn in blood and fire. The Assembly passed the Soul Accords 3 days later. Universal law binding on all species. Any attack targeting children would be considered an act of species-level war. No exceptions. No negotiations. Humanity had not asked for the law. They had not needed to. 5 years later, Captain Lee sat on the porch of his home on Prime. The purple grass swayed in the gentle breeze. The twin moons were rising, casting silver light across the garden. Was 14 now. She had grown tall and strong and she laughed easily these days. The nightmares had faded. The fear had healed. She was playing in the garden with her friends, their voices bright and happy. Next door, Sergeant, retired now with more medals than he could wear, sat with his wife. Their twin sons and were teenagers, loud and wild and wonderful. They were arguing about something unimportant, the way brothers always did. Caught's eye and raised his teacup in silent salute, raised his own in return. They did not need words. They had been through something together that went beyond words. Uncle called from the garden, "Come play with us." Set down his tea and smiled. The galaxy could wait. The stars could wait. Right now his daughter wanted him to play. He walked into the garden, into the light, into the laughter of children who were safe and free and home. Humanity had been called many things. Siblings, monsters, protectors, nightmares. Some species feared them, some admired them, some would never understand them. But to these children, safe in the purple grass, watched over by parents who had crossed the stars to find them, humanity was something much simpler. Family. And family protected its own. Always. Forever. No matter what.